Okay, welcome to Leave No Doubt. I'm pleased to say that I've been joined by Watford and Nigeria captain William Troost-Ekong. William, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me today.
How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Finished the session today in the snow, so good to be inside now and be warm and do this with you today.
Yeah, for people to understand what's just happened, the weather has been ridiculous. The snow's fallen last night. This is being recorded in sort of early December. And we've just been talking about your YouTube channel, mate. You've parked it at the moment for the meantime, but you've got like hundreds of thousands of views on there. Super popular.
Yeah, no, it's been for me it's a bit mixed, of course. I think it was great. I think it was a good way for me to give a real insight of what we were doing, especially in Nigeria. But yeah, it was a lot of work on the side, even though I was just doing the recording. I decided to just give it a break for a moment, and I've had so many requests to bring it back, but I have to just find the right time to get back to it.
It's almost like at Watford there has to be some sort of YouTuber in the building. As Ben Foster retired, he must have thought that you were going to take his crown.
And there's a very, very big boots to fill, those are. So, it'd be good to get back to it again sometime. I enjoy doing it, but I just have to wait for the right time to get back to it.
I've watched a lot of stuff, William, in the last few days, obviously, that you've been involved with, your own channel and podcast. Like, I mentioned it for James Alabi's sake, the Baller Talk podcast that you did with those guys. It was brilliant. And you speak very well. And you always give a good interview. But, I'm hoping for the benefit of everybody listening, obviously, the podcast is aimed to help people improve their own games off the back of your experiences. So to start us off, obviously, I've just mentioned there you're the Nigeria captain. And I can imagine that's a huge moment and thing for you. But to get us started, what do you think it is about you that the manager has decided that he wants to make you the Nigeria captain?
I think it's something that is probably, it's come over time. I think as soon as I started playing for Nigeria, we had some great leaders in the team. The first captain I had there was Vincent Nyama, who was obviously a legend. I think he played 102 caps for Nigeria. Helped me a lot when I first came in as a young defender, as a goalkeeper behind me. Then we had John Obi Mikel, and then afterwards we had Ahmed Musa, who still is in and out the team. So when he's with us, then he's still our captain. But in his absence, then it kind of became my role. And I think that just came from consistency in certain parts. I don't necessarily talk about performance. Of course, I'll be loving to say that I performed a lot consistently, but I think it's more about what I try to add to the team. Try and keep myself in shape, make sure I'm always part of the squad. Give the manager to think about a player that is going to be here a lot. So that's, I think, the first criteria. And the second thing I think probably is the attitude and just how I communicate with him and with the other players. And I think in a certain way you have to be quite selfless as well. I will try and put the team first. So I think those are probably the things that were important for him. And with this manager that we have now, then the manager that we had before that as well. Any experience, I think now I'm 29, I'm probably one of the older players in the team as well. So I've been around, played in some big tournaments. I think those are the kind of things that you kind of get just by playing and the way you present yourself. Like I said, I'll try and help the team. I think those are probably the things that he's looking for.
That selflessness that you talk about, mate, is it's quite rare, really. That obviously that a captain's role is, of course, to be selfless, but people don't go out of their way to be that. It's almost like they have to become it to be part of a team. Have you always been aware of your role in the team as being selfless, or when you were given the role as captain, did you have to sort of change the way that you approach things?
I think I had to learn how to balance that a bit more. I think I've always been someone who's been quite vocal. I think especially in my position, it's normal you try to organise a team on the pitch. I try to always stand up for the players. If I thought there was something that needed to be said to the coaching staff or vice versa, if the boys weren't pulling their weight, including myself, then I'll always be someone to be quite vocal about that. But I think over time you kind of learn, to pick your moments and, when to be mellow, maybe a little bit more subtle with it. And sometimes, you really have to give, a team or a training session a kick up the arse. I think you can only do that if you try and set the example yourself, because there's no point of me, really giving it a good go if I'm not really on it myself. So, those are the things that I've kind of made my own and tried to make it my best trait. And always making sure that wherever I do, I always give 100%, because then I can ask the same from my teammates and also from the coaching staff if I need to. I think those are the kind of things you kind of learn along the way. But it hasn't always been as easy, because I think before I was quite full on and sometimes maybe a little bit too aggressive. And then sometimes you see that it will create more conflict instead of actually necessarily resolving the situation. But that's always been it's been a learning curve for me as well. And I think the more chance I've had of being part of different teams and also seeing the younger generation coming through and what works and what doesn't work in the team, you kind of learn how to adapt.
When you say aggressive, that you used to be a little bit more aggressive, what do you mean?
Sometimes I think that there'll be moments maybe where I'd raise my voice too much. Maybe there'll be moments where, I don't know. I try to get into situations where it's almost trying to be very dominant and being a dominant leader. I think I've realised as well that sometimes you don't have to say anything, and when you don't say anything, it might be more powerful. And just picking your moments when you do say something, because then your message tends to carry more weight. So. Those are the things that I kind of learned, and the biggest thing as well, I think, is example, because I know I've had some great captains that I've had leading teams that I've played in, and then not necessarily the most vocal ones, but they will just set an example with just even little things from timekeeping to how they apply themselves in sessions, how they go about situations when the team might be down, might not be playing, when they get injured, how they carry themselves. Those are all things that you can see that the rest of the squad might be looking at you, and the way that you behave, that will rub off on the rest of the players. And I think after a while you just realise there's more eyes and people start looking at you for direction, and then you have to be very careful in the way you do it, because I think the way you address the situation sets the tone. And I think that's what I meant with sometimes maybe being too aggressive, because then before you know it, it'd be a shout. In changing rooms you always have a lot of egos, and everyone feels like they might be the man in the situation. And I think when you try to trump that all the time, then you can create a lot of conflict, and before you know it, you might have players that don't like you or don't like the way you address the situation, and then you can't really lead a team, because you try and get a collective and a togetherness that you might lose if you try and do that too much. And that's what I did before.
It's interesting that I've asked you a question about almost to boost your own ego in a way, that why have you been chosen as the captain, and all the things that you've spoken about is how you are able to create a team environment, and how you are able to put your teammates first, and how you are able to become somebody that you think they can go in the same direction as. That perception of being a team player, and I'm a little bit older than you, and I know that when I was younger, my sole focus was to establish myself as a player. I was very selfish, every time I stepped on the pitch, if we won or lose, so long as I played well, that was what was most important to me. Whereas obviously at my age now, if I don't play very well but you win the game, I'm quite pleased about that. It doesn't necessarily matter, my own benefit doesn't necessarily matter. Would you say that's similar in a way to how your career has gone, or have you always been that selfless team player?
No, I don't think so. I think I've always been in a position where I had to prove something. I think the thing that's kind of changed, I think over the course of the years, you learn to, you get to know yourself better. I think the best players have a great understanding of what they're capable of, what they're good at and what they're not good at. And then, I think when I'm talking about the Nigeria team, I know that I'm definitely not the most talented player in the room. We've got so many great players, and that can really affect the game, on the pitch, maybe individual brilliance. And you try to understand that, and you're also trying to facilitate that and give them the best environment. But the same way, they'll need players to sometimes do the dirty work. I think it probably also relates to my position, where there is a little bit less glory, and there has to be more understanding that you're working for the team, and giving the players in front of you a good chance to decide a game for you. So I think that is a bit of a journey, and it's something that I still sometimes have conflict with, because of course I would love to play fantastic every game. I would love to be the best player every game, and that I still set out every game trying to do that. But I know there's a lot of situations why that might not necessarily be the case, and I think you just kind of learn how to find a middle ground and understand my role and position in the team.
We're going to get in, obviously, that you've played in so many countries, so many different clubs, that your development as a player is obviously, you've had so many more experiences maybe than somebody your age who's only ever played in England, right? And to give people at home a little bit of context who are listening to this or watching this, you played in Holland, you played in Belgium, you played in Norway for a bit, Turkey and Italy, obviously, before returning to England. So your education of football, I mean, and you started in England, obviously in the U team with Fulham and Spurs. So your education as a player has obviously been better than quite a lot of other people, or you've had more access to different cultures to what a lot of other people have. Would you say that the experiences that you've had in loads of different countries and loads of different clubs have made you better? Or do you think if you'd stayed in England throughout your career, you'd be the same player?
No, I think they've definitely made me better. I think for me, also part, if I just quickly touch on the last bit about the leadership and being part of the team and for Nigeria, his relatability, there's almost, no situation I can't understand with my teammates. I think that makes it easy as well. We have players that are playing in Italy now. I've played there for a year. I understand what they're going through, what it's like. Obviously being in England and England being the most prestige league, Premier League, having touched and experienced that shortly. All those experiences together kind of makes it easy for me to understand different people, understand different languages, understanding different cultures. And I think that adds to you not just as a football player, but as a person in general. And coming to England at a young age, because I came to England when I was 12 to go to a boarding school. For me, being abroad and trying new things has always been part of me, and I think it's kind of defined who I am. Even if I go further back to growing up in Holland, but my dad always lived in Nigeria. I spent almost all my holidays in Nigeria, so traveling and experiencing different, cultures has always been something that I've felt very comfortable with, and I think it's opened my eyes to so many different things that I might not necessarily been exposed to if I would have just stayed in Holland or in England playing football. So looking back at my journey, I think it added so many different parts to my game, and also I just needed that experience along the way, which I think has improved me. And I'm not saying that being in England wouldn't have done the same thing, but I think the realistic trajectory for me being in England at the time when I got released when I was 19 is I would have probably gone to non-league or try and get into a team in League Two and fight my way up the leagues, and that probably would have still put me in good stead to hopefully eventually play in the Premier League. But I think the journey that I went on and travelling around Europe probably made me a little bit more cultured as a player, and also made it easier for me to work with different managers that we've had here, which have been foreign managers as well, which you often see in the top end of the Premier League. So I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but this worked for me at the time. Yeah,
I'm interested. We're going to get deeper into sort of each stage of your development, but I'm glad you touched on that 19-year-old experience you had at Spurs, because interestingly, when I've watched the interviews where you speak about that and you talk about what we're going to discuss in a second, you sit here now as an elite footballer. You've played in the Premier League, you've played in World Cups, but during that time as a 19-year-old, you talk about yourself in a way as that you thought, I've made it because I'm a scholar at Spurs. You reference your coach telling you to take the earrings off and the flashy boots. You talk about how you had a meeting, obviously, with Tottenham when they released you and told you you were way off it, and your mother was sat there and surprised that this was her son and this is how, where you'd got to in your youth career. And I can imagine that's super difficult because there's thousands of young guys across the country who probably are getting the same feedback as in like, why are you wearing the flashy boots? Why are you wearing that? And obviously, and people in the game, their perception of young players now is that as well. Like, it's too much too soon. They think they've made it, all this stuff. But, you sit here now as a very humble, super intelligent guy, rounded as a player. Can you talk to me about the 19-year-old version of yourself and what major differences that you think there are now between 29-year-old and 19-year-old you?
Good question. I think, if I think about it now, most of those things probably were from insecurities to a certain degree. I think when I joined Spurs, that's when I really started my academy journey. I was quite late to the game anyway because, most of my teammates at the time, they had been there somewhat longer, some of them from under 9s or under 7 or under 8s. And I came in as a 15-year-old schoolboy, halfway through the season when most of the players are going to find out whether they're going to get a scholarship or not. So for me, trying to make that jump into getting a scholar, which was already a very big deal for an academy player, and then receiving that, I think maybe within 3 weeks of my 6 week trial, I couldn't get my head around it. It was unbelievable. So all of a sudden at my school, I was now the boy who had an offer to go and play full-time football at sixth form at Tottenham Hotspur, which was a massive deal being in the Hertfordshire school. And then starting that journey, I somewhat thought I made it. So, I remember I got, I think, £120 a week, which was the standard scholarship contract, which, you probably had to just spend or try to save and I remember buying my first fresh pair of Air Force and some earrings. And, it was a big deal for me. And I think the whole stigma of being a professional footballer, which I was then seen at in my social circle, and also something which I felt myself becoming, which I thought I was at the time, quite made it quite difficult for me then to realise that I was still quite far off it. And I think for Spurs at the time and our academy manager, who saw me come in very hungry and wanting to do something to then maybe see me relax a little bit, knowing that I was probably quite far behind the rest of the boys technically, because I'd obviously missed that football education. For me to come in, and then our academy manager, thinking that I was probably going to grasp that better and realise that I was a bit behind, but physically I had some attributes that were fitting for my position, and I was very willing to learn when I first came in, and that attitude changed a little bit. It was very difficult, because then all of a sudden I realised that I wasn't playing in the under-18 team. In the training session, I was probably the last person to get picked if some of the other boys had to choose teams. And then it almost became like a point for me to prove all the time that I was someone, or I was still important. And then, I tried to do that in different ways, and make yourself stand out by getting nice boots or flashy clothes or something that in the changing would still impress people. Whereas when I first got in there, I think people were just impressed by how I was playing at the time. So, you kind of lose yourself in that. And I think at that age, when you're 16, 17, 18, 19, probably I can go on probably 25, all the way up to 25, you're still discovering yourself, understanding where you stand in the world, what you believe in. And I think the football culture is quite sheepish anyway, especially at the young ages. So you just follow and think what's cool and trying to fit in a certain way. And I think those insecurities now, I think I've got a better understanding of myself, what works for me, what I find is important or not. And at that time I didn't. And I think that was probably the biggest difference. And if I was looking back at it now and speaking to myself, is that if you want to go down that route of, setting yourself apart off the pitch and by your behaviour, you better be the very, very best player in that team to do that, because I think that's just how football works. And even though some of those views might be slightly old school, I think the people that are going to make decisions about your career or your coaches are in a different phase of their life, and they might not be as understanding of what you're trying to do, or might not give you the time of the day to figure out, that you're just trying to set yourself apart, or maybe trying to express yourself, because for them the most important thing is how you're performing on the pitch. And I wasn't performing at the time, so I think that really clashed. And if anything, then my behaviour kind of made it more difficult, because I got seen as probably less coachable, or someone who didn't necessarily care as much about my football development, but more about what I looked like as a football player at the time, which, if thinking about it now, I was just an academy player. I wasn't a professional football player.
It's tough, I think, in that environment as a youth team player, to have total honest perspective of where you're at, because you obviously think you're something in terms of your football game as well. Like, you probably, I know young guys think that they can do everything, and they find it very difficult to understand how they are effective on a match day at that young age. They still believe if I'm a defender, I'm a ball playing, strong, powerful, quick, I can do absolutely everything, but that might not be the case. And when ultimately you were released by Tottenham, I know a lot of people in interviews that you've done have said, did you have a point to prove to Tottenham when you got released? And I know you speak about it, and you obviously, of course you did, but the question I want to ask you is, At what point, obviously football was always a serious ambition for you, but you're talking there about maybe taking your eye off the ball a little bit in terms of your development and more so living how you perceive the footballer should be. At what point after leaving Tottenham did that change and you started putting football first?
I think it actually happened probably 6 months before I left the building. I had a conversation because they gave me a third-year scholar, which basically meant they weren't sure if they were going to give me a professional deal or not, and they gave me some more time to prove myself. I think when I got to the end of my second-year scholarship, so I was still part of the under-18 team, I started playing. This was after I had my first meeting, which was at the end of my first year, when my youth team coach basically sat myself and my mum down and said, "Yeah, you're miles off it." And at the moment, we don't really think that you really have a future, even in non-league football, which might be a realistic target for a youth team player. And I think that really took me back. And hearing that, and then obviously seeing how my mum reacted to that, which, for me felt like a big disappointment, because she really backed me to do this, even against what my dad wanted me to do, because he wanted me to carry on with my school and do my sixth form there. So then for me something kind of clicked, and I realized, okay, well, I need to just get back to working hard and showing that I can do it. And I think maybe I needed that feeling of really being on the edge and it not being possible anymore, which then kind of got me to work hard and work, relentlessly. And then 6 months down the line, at the end of my second year when I started playing, and then I got my third year extension when they weren't sure if I was, due a pro deal or not. So I was by this time playing with under 23s, development squad, they called it. And then halfway through that, I remember Tim Sherwood, saying, probably not going to work out here. So, you're allowed to go on trial to different teams. And you can still come here and train with us, but, you have from now, January until the summer to basically try to give me a head start instead of me having to wait until the summer and then being released and then trying to look for a club. So I knew it was over, but at the same time, I had the facilities there. We just moved to a new training ground. I had a fantastic gym, which we were allowed to access. We had the training sessions still every day with the 23s. And I used to just hang around and just work on my technique on the pitches in the afternoon because I had nowhere else to be. So, it was either that or going back to digs and playing on the PlayStation. And in some way, I think I was just preparing myself for what was going to come next. And then, I realised, okay, I need to start networking, talking to other players, seeing what an agent can do for me, if I can go to a trial. But thankfully, my under-23 coach at the time, Chris Ramsey, he was very helpful. He actually signed me when I was under 16. And he picked up the phone and called up quite a lot of clubs to try and get me there for trials or play in their under-23 development squads to try and show myself. So in that sense, I felt like I still had a good access to maybe my next opportunity. And then I really started working like that was going to be my last chance, because it was really. And that then eventually resulted me on going on trial in Holland in the summer and signing for Groningen, which is a professional team there, as a first team squad player, which was a massive deal for me.
When you say I worked hard relentlessly, obviously people work hard, but look, in specifically, what was it that you were doing that you weren't doing before that you think, enabled you to start really progressing?
I think I started focusing on my, physical attributes. I was quite, big, tall. I hadn't really filled that much yet. But I spent more time in the gym, made a gym program with a sports scientist that I started following almost every day. When I wasn't too physically knackered. And I started working on my technique. So I was, we had a dome there, which was, with a Astro pitch, and they had a, big wooden wall which you could bounce the ball off. So I used to just play balls off there, work on my touch, left foot, right foot, practicing my turns, and just my comfortability with the ball in general. So, and I just did that and gave myself challenges. If I could, do keep you up hits from one side to the other, from one side of the pitch to the other side, how many times I could play off my left foot, bouncing off the wall without making a mistake. And then I was just gave myself challenges every day to working it. And then I just felt I became more comfortable with the ball, because that was one of the sticking points, is that they didn't think I was comfortable with the ball on my feet, which obviously as a centre back is a problem if you want to work at a certain level. And also, just because I'd grown quite tall, hadn't really grown into my body yet physically, and I wanted to make sure that was an attribute. So I was working hard in the gym. So
Those are the two things that I could do outside of my normal training sessions. And then on top of that, we were doing quite a lot of, I was doing quite a lot of running, because if I wasn't in the match day squad, the next day you had to try and get certain meters in. And then I remember one of the sports scientists saying, "Oh, actually, you're quite good at long distance, box to box. You're looking good. Try and push." And then it's something that I really hated doing. I tried to make that a thing which I became good at. And I think it was just setting challenges and keeping myself like active and trying to push it further and further. And I think that set me in good stead for what's going to come next.
I think it's incredible, really, because watching you more so last year in the Premier League, obviously because it's easy to watch the Premier League, but watching the highlights of some of the games that you've played this year, if I was to describe you as a defender, I'd say you're comfortable and composed on the ball, but you're telling me that wasn't always the case, and to get that sort of technical ability that you've got now, you used to go in the dome on your own and practice, and I think that's incredible, because if you ask the kid to do that now, more often than not, they say no. They'd say like, "Oh, I'm not going in there on my own," or I don't need to, things like that. Like, how did you become so honest with yourself that? And because I've also heard that you describe yourself as stubborn when you were younger. So somebody's now telling you that we don't think you're good enough on the ball, and instead of going, "Nah, I think I am," like you're wrong, I'll go somewhere else and prove myself. You went, "No, all right, if that's the case, then I'm going to go in the dome on my own and practice it." How challenging was it actually to feel that way? Did that take a little bit of time, or was it like an instant, you know what, yeah, I'm going to go in there and practice?
No, that took time. Took time, yeah, it was really difficult. I think it was also because I went out to play some trial games. I went out to Brentford, played with their under-23s, which was through a connection of our Chris Ramsey, which was our under-23 coach. He knew one of the coaches there. And they didn't want to sign me. I remember they had Alfie Mawson and one other lad who was there. And I walked in there thinking, I'll be good enough. At least they'll give me a deal here. Didn't work out. I think I went on trial to, I'm trying to think who else I went to, Ipswich. I think I played with them. Didn't work out. It just became like a reality check from, you're not near it. And someone else where I thought I might walk there and give it a go. And I had an agent at the time as well who was then, giving me honest feedback saying, "Listen, we've spoken to this club, seeing if you can go there for a trial," but they said no, and this is the reason why, because they don't think you can do that yet. We don't think you're, comfortable with the ball enough. So then it really became my reality. It was a lot of tears as well. I think, I remember being in my digs and being really upset about it. And then, there's two ways about it. Either I was going to give up there, or I was going to say, no, actually, I need to dig in and try and make myself better and show everyone that I can do that. So, and that was the route I went down. And also, I think somewhat kind of reminded me of my younger years. I spent a lot of time playing football in the street when I, without myself knowing it, was improving my technique, because I was doing basic things every day, the way I was passing, playing 1v1s. And even at school, I loved playing football, and it was almost like trying to find that love back and really trying to find the love of being better and improving the game. And I think, that kind of kick-started that again, and then it became an obsession, really.
I think it's amazing that I'm sat across the table from, a full international captain of an enormous country like Nigeria, somebody who's playing the Premier League and in Serie A, for a couple of seasons, but is describing themselves as a 19, 20-year-old as not being perceived as good enough. And that's, I think, it's just an incredible example for people to know that if at 19, 20, you're told that for whatever reason you're not at the level you need to be to play at the top level, it doesn't mean that your career is over. Especially so when you went on to play in Holland, was the ambition then always to, I know obviously you travelled around Europe and we'll get bit by bit as to how you improved at each step, but was the focus, I'm going to go back to England, or was the focus just to become the best version of yourself that you possibly could?
To be honest, I think when I left England and got released, I didn't think it was going to be possible for me to get back. I think that was my honest thought. Of course, I dreamt of it. And I think being in a building, seeing all those great players, and I had my odd occasional training with the first team just because there were short numbers, and seeing what that was like, it was like, oh my God, I've tasted it. This is what I want. But yeah, realistically, I didn't think that was possible at the time. So for me, it was more about trying to have a career full stop. And I wanted to become a first team player. I think when you're young in an academy, you always dream of your debut and playing your first game and actually making it to being a professional. And that was like the only thing that had my sights set on. So yeah, when I returned to Holland and went on trial at the time, I said, okay, well, I'm going to make sure that I'm the fastest runner here. If we got the sprint test, it was pre-season. I'm going to make sure I jump the highest because I've been working on that. I'm going to run the yo-yo test until I'm actually going to vomit. And then, I'm not going to give them any reason why they can't sign me if we're talking about, the basic things of football. And then if it comes down to the technical part and I'm not good enough, okay, fair enough. But I mean, I've worked on that and I've given that my best shot. And that was my whole idea of just trying to get into a first team, being in and around it. And be chomping at my chance.
It's mad, isn't it, that we're talking now about how those negative experiences as a young kid almost propelled you into feeling like you have to work hard, like to having a realistic knowledge of where you were, about where your game was, and of getting out of that habit of thinking, oh no, I'm stubborn, I'm not going to listen to what a coach says, I'm uncoachable, I think I'm good enough, doesn't matter what you say. Through those negative experiences, actually positive things can happen. Yeah. And, I've got it in a bit to talk about, a lot of your highs and lows, because you've really yo-yoed in terms of every time that you've almost like, just off the top of my head, like you go to a World Cup, incredible. Yeah. You have a penalty away in the first game. Yeah. Something that's, oh my God, like it's the worst day in the world, but it's actually not.
Yeah.
And you've done that like quite consistently in your career. Now, obviously, like I've said, sit across from me, having just played in the Premier League last season.
Yeah.
But you can look back now in hindsight and say like, oh, those negative things that happened shaped me as a person, shaped me as a player. But at the time, you're in your digs, you're crying your eyes out. I've been through similar at 15, released by Portsmouth, who are my club, still the club I support. I think it's the end of the world, never going to be able to perform. What advice can you give to young guys who are going through similar things, being released, being told they're not good enough, as to what do they actually do? Because it's easy for you to say like, oh, just keep working hard, it'll happen. But what can they actually do to help themselves still progress after negative things have happened to them?
Again, very good question. I think, I think that it's of course, every big moment that is significant like that, being released, giving away a penalty in your first game of the World Cup, last year in the Premier League, having games where you decide the game negatively by making mistakes. All those things, like you have to almost embrace it. It's very painful. You kind of go through the emotion of it. It's upsetting. And then, you give yourself time to kind of grieve that moment, and then you have to come out the other side. And, that decision what you make afterwards kind of, is going to set the tone for what happened, in that moment. And, I always like to think of it, about talking about defining moments. Are you going to let that moment be the last moment that people remember, or are you going to try and, push on and just make that part of an experience that now I can sit about and talk about without starting to cry again? Because obviously it did really upset me, all those moments. So, I think that has become a thing. And, I think the mental part of it is so difficult, because I think once you can grasp that and really put those moments into perspective, and knowing those are not going to be the last moments where it's going to happen, and it kind of makes you fearless as well, because when something happens which you perceive to be your worst nightmare, you've got nothing to lose. So then you can, the next time you're on that pitch, you might as well go for it, and the next time you're playing a game like that, you might as well go for it. But it can be quite frightening, because I think when you make a big mistake or something bad happens, the automatic thing is that you try to protect yourself from being in a situation like that again. So your mindset changes, and I think it's just trying to constantly talk to yourself, and when you feel those thoughts coming up or something negative, to just understanding and say, okay, I accept that, but this is what I'm going to do now. This is what I'm going to do now. And then you learn how to get past those moments. And I think if you talk about a key of being able to keep going and getting to greater heights, is I think if you get that understanding of how to accept a moment like that, dissect it, understanding what you've actually could have done better, and then also accepting that there's certain things that you are honest mistakes, or things that are out of your control because you've given it your best shot. I think that puts you in the best stead to then progress again. And none of us are perfect. And I always like to, you look at yourself first. But I mean, if you look at all the greatest players on big stages or along the way, they would have gone through similar moments like that to make them, the player that they are or the person that they are along the way. And if we just talk about some moment that everyone's going to relate to, maybe now with Harry Kane and the penalty, I would have backed him 100% to put that away. And I know that for him, this would have been a very difficult moment as well. But he's going to make him even stronger and even better. And moments like that, all the best players go through it as well. But I think when it happens to yourself, it almost seems like it only happens to me, and there's no way I can come back from this. And your whole world just seems to crumble. But I think it's just that understanding and also acceptance that those parts are going to be part of the journey. Just thinking of it as a marathon all the time.
It's great advice. And on your development, still talking about your development, and we've probably discussed more so the physical and the technical aspects of your game. But when you play elite football like you do as a centre-back, you have to mentally be able to understand football. And, I've obviously got no experience of playing football at that level against the sort of players that you find yourself up against all the time. But as a defender, centre-back, somebody who's able to read the game, and how did you develop your mental understanding of what football looked like, and especially your position? How does that development look like?
It's the biggest thing for my position, I would say, is the experience part. The difficult thing of being a young player is that you need to find a way for how to get that experience. Like I said, making your debut. Before that time, I think you have to spend time watching experienced players. So when I was younger, we used to as part of being a youth team player, you had to attend all the first team matches at White Hart Lane. So our youth team coach was very good at giving the players a task specifically for your position. So we had Ledley King, Michael Dawson, Yunus Kabul, William Gallas, Sebastian Bassong, great centre backs at the club at the time. And he would say, well, today when you're watching the game, just see how does he control the ball? What is he looking at when the cross is coming in? What is he preparing himself with? Which foot is forward? Which foot is back? Is he side on? And just trying to read that with them. And I think then once you start seeing it, that's when you can start understanding it, and then that's where you can start actually practicing it. And then before you know it, it becomes a habit. It's 10 times easier when you're actually doing it yourself and you're making those mistakes yourself and living those experiences, because they're the most vivid in your mind, and you probably learn the quickest. But I think until that moment, it's almost you can simulate it by just watching someone doing it. I think that's a great skill, watching other players and trying to pick out what they do well, and also I think understanding your own game and being very critical. And understanding why you make certain decisions in certain situations, why you do things good in certain situations. Is it because I put myself in the best position for it? How come I'm always good at dealing with this cross? How come this is always giving me difficulties? And I think once you start understanding the game better in the sense of actual actions and realistic moments in the game specific to your position, the better you can deal with it. And that's when you start seeing players, looking at ease and always looking comfortable. And when you talk about the best centre-backs looking like Rolls Royces and always cruising through a game, is because their understanding is so good, and no situation surprises them because they already see what's happening and they know what they need to do. And then the execution is the second part, but you've put yourself in the best position to execute a pass, a block, an interception, marking the player, and then it starts looking effortless.
So what does that look like for you at the moment then? How were you able to combine absolutely everything to being the best defender that you can possibly be? And physically and technically, obviously we've mentioned with your gym work and your extras after training, but mentally, how are you able to stay sharp, stay focused, to understand the game as well as you do now?
That is something that didn't come until about later in my career. I think I started working with a video analyst about 3 seasons ago. And before that, I always watch back highlights of the game. I was quite lucky that I could get my clips sometimes through a video analyst at a club or an academy. Even they already started doing that. But sometimes I was just trying to, pick up my own highlights. So I'll be going through the clicks and be like, videos, be like, okay, this was bad. gave away a goal here, but this was an amazing thing. And it's almost like you're just watching it as a spectator instead of actually, looking at yourself and understanding why you made certain decisions. Because it's easy to say when you're watching something back on a video, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. But why did you do that? And I think that was a big thing for me during the game was how much information I was taking in to then making my choices. So I realized that I spent most of my early career up till 25, 26 doing almost everything on instinct. So I wasn't taking as many pictures. Of course, there's moments where I looked over my shoulder, but I wasn't always checking my shoulder. I didn't always put myself in the best body shape. And when I started working with this video analyst, who I still work with today, he picked up there's so many moments that I'm just going off feel and not necessarily of real-time information and seeing what's happening around me. So that became like another thing, seeing how many times am I checking my shoulder, how many times are the best players, your Van Dijks, you name them, Stefan de Vrij, players that are at elite clubs and working a certain way, what are they doing? And then I realized that I was actually nowhere near with a simple thing of just looking around me and seeing what my spacing was like. And yeah, that became like another thing that I wanted to add to it. So, and I think once you have that, you start playing the game more in your head, you kind of become more calm as well because, like I said, you give yourself a better picture, and then you can, apply your skills to those situations that you see. So I think that's, for me, it's been something that has become, a big part of my game, and I still get it wrong a lot of the time. But then it's, I know at least, or I try to understand why I get it wrong. And I think, part of being experienced as well, you have to learn how to adapt during a game as well. I think that was a massive thing as well. It's easy setting up for a game and obviously you have your manager pre-chew already what you're going to do as a team, what kind of striker you're going to play against. And then you turn up to a match day and they might play a different formation or a different player, or the player might have a different instruction from his manager how to play against you. And I think if you can dissect that very quickly of what his plan is and how he's trying to, play chess against you, then you can apply your, skills better and understanding of the game to try and stop that. So, I think that part of the reading it just came to looking and understanding more what's happening around me.
That awareness that or at least spatial awareness that you're trying to improve, that you've said as you've tried to improve in the latter stages of your career over the last 3 years or so, that's really difficult of a skill to learn, almost off scratch really, if everything you did was off instinct and now you're almost consciously trying to look around you and to become more aware of what's going on. It's really tough to train, at least. How did you do that? What was the process of you learning? Were you doing it in training or by watching?
A lot of it was watching. I think I was quite lucky because I was playing quite a lot throughout those periods, so I could apply it to games. And often I would watch specific things that I did. Well, we always did a standard analyst of the game. Even if you won, lost, play good or play bad. And I like to do that normally on the day of the game in the morning, so then it'll be fresh in my mind for the evening or late in the afternoon when we actually played. But in the periods when I wasn't playing, then I'll try to apply those things to my training session. So if we're having an 11v11 or attack for defense moments or crossing and finishing, and we might be defending, little things about body shape and checking my shoulder that I try to apply within those sessions, so that I've made that part of my training. And it might not necessarily be something that the coach is talking about. And if I felt like I couldn't get it in the session, then I might ask, a coach to stay behind and just work with a striker or mannequin, or just, facing up the ball a certain way or working on my body shape. And try to practice it as much as I can. And then I think just through the practice, then it slowly becomes a habit. And then before you know it, you can kind of check it off your list, and then you go off to the next thing that you need to improve.
Of course, like all these things that we're talking about that you've developed over time, have also come whilst you're moving different countries, different clubs, experience different things in your life. Obviously having a young child, you experience different cultures, different training sessions, different coaches. Like, you're taking a lot on at the time. And I'm interested to know, because obviously I know you're the Dutch Nigerian heritage that you're from has probably made it easier for you to start your journey in Holland from obviously when you left Tottenham. But all the other moves internationally to Belgium, Norway, Turkey, Italy, people are going to be interested in knowing, especially for somebody who started in the youth team in Tottenham, how do those sort of moves come about? Have you got an agent that you say, look, like I want to experience as many different countries as I am? Or are you being approached, say, by Udinese that say, oh, we want William Troost-Ekong to come and play for us, and that just it happens out of randomness? People are going to be interested into, if I want to go abroad, because a lot of young guys now from this country are seeking, obviously, moves abroad and stuff. How does that happen?
I think for me, the motivation for all the choices was always to play football. I think that's the key thing, was the experience thing. I wanted to play. I hated when I didn't play. Even when I was in Holland the first time when I signed at Groningen, I made my debut, got subbed over half time. After I made another appearance for about 5 minutes in 6 months' time, and then they were happy for me to stay in the team, but I said I wanted to go on loan because I wanted to play football. I'm 20 now, and I knew that if I wanted to have a career, I needed the experience of just playing regular football to practice those things and to understand my craft and be ready for whatever level I could try and get to. So that was always my motivation, was the playing thing. And then that kind of came the first few things. I had an agent when I left Spurs, who was a Dutch agent at the time, so automatically that made that Dutch market most attractive for me, also because I was just playing for the under-19 national team, so I had some exposure there, even though I hadn't really played at Spurs, especially not in my last year, to just get my foot in the door for a trial. And then once I was playing towards the second half of the season consistently, of course you have different ages coming around, all of them have different areas where they're good at. And I was just always very open-minded. So when, I heard an agent say to me, oh yeah, listen, we can sign you in Belgium. This club really wants you, but they want you to go on loan, and you can even go to Norway or Sweden. Some people might be like, oh no, that's not for me. It's not for me. And I said, you know what? I'll go to both places. I'll go see the club. I'll sit down with them and I'll see what their plan is. And if it sounds like I'm going to go and play football there, then why not? I'm still at that time, didn't have kids. I was in a relationship, but my wife now, she was more than happy to move anywhere, and I just kind of made all the decisions for my career, and might not necessarily what looked the sexiest or would pay me the most money, or I could be in a nice sunshine somewhere, because Norway was absolutely freezing, by the way. So it's just about playing games, and then throughout my career, when you become an experienced player and you've played consistently, and every season you've had 25 plus games, and where you've done well, or you try to do your best, then you start getting approached by more agents, maybe off a different level, who can bring you to the next step. I think throughout my career I probably have had 4 or 5 agents, and whenever I felt like they weren't necessarily trying to help me to that next step, or their motivation might have been different to what I was trying to achieve, then I wasn't afraid to cut ties with them either. So I always think of it, in 2 ways. I think in your young career, it's very important that you choose someone who can try and create that path for you, and also has the contacts to, look at different markets, and maybe not necessarily just be focused on what's happening here on your doorstep in England, if you are open to playing abroad and getting experience. And then I think once you start playing more and more, then the tables kind of turn, because then you can pick the agents which you think can do the best job for you. And then they also have, they have to prove to you that they can add some value to you, because, you're playing football, but eventually they're working for you, in trying to get you a better deal or a better club, or more experience. And then I think once I went to the World Cup, I was 24 at the time. Then I got into the next phase of my career of really an established player, with probably potential playing in a bigger league in Europe. And then, I got clubs calling me directly, or I had agents who had been mandated by clubs to come and speak to me about moving there. And that was a completely new world for me as well. So it was very strange when I was in Turkey at the time, and Gino Pozzo, the owner from Watford, Udinese, called me up and said, oh, actually, we really want to get you. The deadline is day after tomorrow. Would you be interested in the project? And, can you fly tonight? Then I think I had 1 or 2 other clubs who were also ready to go, and it was like a new world where, I now had choices of 2 or 3 good clubs in France, in Italy that were willing to take me. So, but that was all a later stage, way later down the line, from when I went to Norway to actually visit a club and have a sit down with a manager to see if I would actually be interested to, obviously being called up by a president of a club, which I already knew everything about, but I had to play a little bit coy and not give away too much of my cards. So, so I think that just kind of is like a natural progression, but that wasn't my focus at all. And I also didn't try to make it about, my agent didn't help me here, or I didn't make a move because my agent didn't, or because I heard that so much as well within changing rooms of blaming agents of not making, a career. And I think if you try and keep that in your own hand as much as you can by putting yourself in a position where you can play, then you have the power, because the more you play and the more you can perform and show what you're about, eventually if you are ready for the next level, then the teams and the clubs are going to be looking for you, because I think the world of scouting has changed completely as well. All the games are now recorded, they're all clipped up on Instat, Y Scout, you name it. And if you're performing consistently, you never know who's watching those clips, or who might send out someone to watch you play. And you see players are going from non-league to championship teams, Premier League teams, players from second division in any club in Europe, or country in Europe going to big teams. I think if you just hit certain stats and you're getting certain performances, then you're going to get noted one way or another. So I think you kind of have to trust that and just focus on what you can actually control.
An agent is ultimately just as good as his player, right?
100%.
I actually had a conversation with an agent that has represented me for most of my career on a podcast the other day, a guy called Brian Howard, and he said that now more than ever, statistics are dominating moves. He said, obviously people need to see you with their own eyes, of course they do, but your name will move around clubs and in people's email inboxes because of the statistics now that you perform on a match day.
Yeah.
Were you aware of that, or not really?
I wasn't aware of that, no. So that was also something new. I thought it was just literally scouts coming out and watching the game, and you have a good game, and then they might want to watch you again, or something happens. But then, you realise that is just a small part of the puzzle. And then also, a manager has to like you. You have to fit in the team, fit in the system. But now more than ever, like you said, it's all about the stats. And of course, an agent's only as good as other players performing. That is, there is also maybe 10% part of it that, if an agent is good at a certain club, they might be able to, if it's between you and someone else and they've already done 2 or 3 deals there, they might work with that agent again because they trust the process that he works through. So so there's certainly some parts that might help you, but you can't be reliant on that. And that whole thing about the statistics was also something that I learned later. And also when I started to focus myself a little bit more on what I was actually doing, what I was performing, and seeing what my stats looked like compared to other players. And then you saw that all the players in the big clubs were there because they were getting consistent, high stats in whatever, whatever part of their craft they were very good at or exceptional at.
So football in Europe, there's like people obviously for me who are not really aware, but see you now play for Watford, watch your game and think, he's strong, powerful, reads the game, comfortable on the ball. In Europe, is football, or are there glaringly obvious differences between different leagues?
There's differences in different leagues, definitely. I think for me, playing in Italy was very nice at my age as a defender. I think there was a lot of focus on the defensive phase of the game as a whole team, positioning, what we spoke about earlier, and just understanding and reading of the game and actually putting in the legwork before a ball comes into the box. What are you doing as a team? Are you getting back into shape? Are you organising well? And whereas before that, when I was in Turkey, it was a little bit more end-to-end, more dynamic. And then, coming to England in the Championship was something different as well. And I thought it's always something going on in the games. There's never phases where a team sits off as much, maybe lets you have the ball, which I think was happening in Italy a lot more. Teams tend to be in the front foot a lot more and a lot more direct. And then that graduating into the Premier League where it would go from slow phases, ball possession, to very dynamic. And if you call out in position, straight away it would create some kind of danger. And I think that's probably the epitome of football. And I think, from the leagues that I've experienced, it was all very different. But yeah, I think, if you're a good player, or, you should be able to adapt to different systems, different types of football. That is all part of being, elite player, I think, as well.
Well, over those 2 seasons, obviously, in Serie A with Udinese, you played 65 times, which was almost all the games. And you described the first season in particular as being the best version of yourself. I know obviously last year in the Premier League and got promoted with Charlton, with Watford at the Championship, But that version of yourself, how would you describe him? When you say that was the best version of me, what do you mean? What were you like?
I think I felt very confident at the time. It was the first big move I had in my career, off the back of quite a good season in Turkey. Obviously the World Cup experience, which kind of, it felt like a relief that I had managed to perform at that stage, that level. And then you almost lose that feeling of, am I really supposed to be here? Do I deserve to be here? And then it's like, okay, I can do it. And I've played against some of the best players in the world, and I felt comfortable there. I can do more of that. And then arriving at a team on deadline day, when they actually, getting it to sign to play. I think I arrived on the Thursday. On the Saturday, I made my debut and the starting 11, even though I couldn't speak with half of my teammates and didn't understand what the manager was saying to me. I just felt like people had a certain perception of myself, and I was fulfilling that, and that filled me with more and more confidence. And I think maybe me also not being able to understand Italian at the time, there was no there was no noise from the outside what the newspapers were writing, if I was performing or not. People were coming up to me in the street saying, "Oh, you played very well. You got man of the match again," and I had no idea that actually even happened. And then it just kind of filled me with more confidence. I felt fit, and it was almost like I was ready for that opportunity, and I felt like I was grasping it. And I had a consistent season. So I think for me that was a very big deal, because I'd almost proven to myself that I could have, I could play at this level in Serie A, which was a respected league at the time, still is, and something maybe that was my highest ambition really, and do that consistently. So that was a very fulfilling year for me. And then, like anything else, you get used to like anything, and then you think about the next thing, what you want to do next. I thought that was a year where, I kind of felt like the shackles came off.
It's funny, isn't it, that you've just described there that the less validation you got from outside influences in terms of social media and the newspapers and the press in Italy, the more you focused on your own game, the better you performed. I think it's so relevant now, obviously, that's a thing, because social media is huge, especially in this country. Everybody's opinion is now valid, and I haven't got social media, partly playing the National League, so no one's got an opinion anyway, but at your level they do, especially for your country. I can imagine that's really difficult. How, especially with the YouTube, I know we sort of touched on it at the start and off camera, and how aware are you of, social media influences, people's opinions on you, and at this point in your life now, 29, how much does it affect you?
The conclusion I made for myself is that it did affect me. I think last year and a half, I really opened myself up for it, with opening up my YouTube channel, being very active on my social media, giving an honest insight of what I was doing. And that wasn't necessarily for self-glorification or, trying to show everyone that here, this is what I've got or this is what I'm doing. It was more about sharing my experience, which I think almost made me more approachable as well, and for people to feel like they could now tell me what they thought of it as well. So, and at the start, I was all fine with it. And I think also part of it, of living my dream of playing in the Premier League, I was very excited to share as much as I could with everyone, because it was, I felt like, okay, this is it. This is the moment now. I want to share it with everyone. I was very proud of it. And then later on in the season, as we started performing less as a team, like I said, I felt like I wasn't performing to what I should have been doing as well on the pitch, which is the underlying factor of everything, what you do and share, especially as people perceive you as a football player for their team. And that's what they want to see you do, is perform. That became a problem, and I felt like it started becoming a weight on my shoulders. And then I decided to give it a break, see how I felt about that. That didn't necessarily feel like it was giving me satisfaction either, because then I felt like I was running away from what for me was a problem. And then I thought, no, actually, I shouldn't do that either, because I still feel like for some people this is still nice to see and might inspire someone. And I'm still proud of the things that I'm doing, irrelevant if that is something that people might like or not like. I know I'm working very hard for it, and in the same way, all my performances I like to think are honest. I always try and give 100%, so it might be good or bad, but I know the work that I've been put in, so I shouldn't feel like I need to hide myself from anyone either. So for me, the balance in that became, sharing some things of my profession, maybe less of my personal life, and also not opening up my comments for everyone to be able to give them, the direct idea opinion of what I was doing. So, and that's been something that's worked really nicely for me. So now it's been a little bit more private in the sense that only people that I follow or I know can voice their opinion. And I'm always here for criticism, but I think it has to come from the right place. And then if people want to write about me or whatever they want to do, they can be more than free to do that. But for me to see that, I would have to specifically go and search for it, which I don't do. So that is absolutely fine now.
I think that's an incredible insight really into a top elite guy's way of handling that, because I'm the same. When I was younger and started making a debut for Bournemouth and stuff, I was so desperate to understand what fans were saying about me. And sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad. When the bad, did affect me, I got my parents telling me like, oh yeah, there's someone online's not been very nice about you, because they didn't understand that it was going to affect me. And bit by bit, I just thought like, nah, it's not for me really. This like it's only going to go one way, and that's negatively. But dealing with pressure, and I'm glad that we've sort of got onto that, because of just before I spoke to you about, obviously we were lucky enough to have Andre Ayew on a podcast, and he was speaking about the pressure of being the Ghana captain, and how every tournament and every game is such an enormous occasion. And you told me obviously it's the same with Nigeria, as I can imagine it is. It's such an enormous nation. We spoke about it being now like a global brand almost. Like every time a home Nigeria shirt comes out, it gets sold out all over the world. Everybody wants it. People are wearing it on nights out now instead of actually to play football. But as the captain, obviously, of that country, I can imagine if you wanted to feel pressure, then you could. And obviously that role does come with a certain amount of pressure. How much responsibility do you shoulder, obviously, of whenever the country comes together for a match day, and how much of the pressure are you aware of every time that you join up with the national team?
I think especially when we play in Nigeria, you really feel it from the moment you land at the airport. Everybody knows that the Super Eagles are in town. We're here for the next 10 days. We've got a game coming up. Everybody's going to watch it. Everybody wants us to beat them 3-0 at home, and it's got to be in a smashing way, and we can do it, and we're going to absolutely, kill them. And that's always the expectation of any game that we play, especially at home. I think you kind of learn how to handle that a little bit. Of course, I understand all the fans' pride of the Super Eagles, of the team, of the great achievements the team has made in the past, and like I said, seeing the players that we have now in great clubs doing fantastic things, feeling that this can be something that we can do again, and just the pride within Africa, especially of being such a big nation, maybe probably being the biggest nation, biggest economy in Africa anyway. We want to be the best football team as well, and that pressure does come with playing for Nigeria, and then especially if you are the captain, like I've been now for quite a lot of games, you do feel it. I think I don't let it weigh me down. If anything, it always spurs me on. It still gives me the butterflies in my stomach that I need to sometimes hit that, that trance, that focus I need to be in to perform. But yeah, it's I think the last moment that I really felt that responsibility and it really hit me hard was obviously the World Cup qualifier when we drew at home against Ghana, and then walking off that pitch and realising that we're not going to be at this World Cup now, and everyone was anticipating for us to go there, and obviously being on the last one and the whole run up, and then the last game being at home, and especially against Ghana, which is our West African rival. That really hit hard. And then going home, and then leaving Nigeria again, obviously flying back home probably took the pressure off a bit because I wasn't faced, by my countrymen day in, day out, everywhere I went. But yeah, I did have a lot of sleepless nights afterwards. And obviously now the tournament being ongoing, is very painful watching it, knowing that we could have been there, and obviously for all the Nigerians watching it as well, and how happy I am for Morocco doing so well. You still kind of dream or think, what could we have done at this tournament? And I think that all Nigerians are probably looking at Qatar the same way.
I think that away goal, for me personally, I think that away goals rule is a little bit outdated. Obviously, I know they've changed that in the Champions League and stuff, and I don't see why that rule is still relevant. But in terms of, we're talking about the pressure specifically, in your role, how much of, when big tournaments or big qualifiers are happening, say that obviously when you went to the World Cup as a young guy, you probably, I can't imagine you were the captain then, but say obviously like in the African Cup of Nations at the moment, you would have been the captain, you're in the team of the tournament. How much of your time is spent feeling the pressure of the team, because ultimately you're the leader, and how much of your time is separated on solely your performance?
I think somewhat I don't necessarily feel that pressure as much from the fans. It's more, I think, for my teammates. There's also sometimes underlying issues within the team. Sometimes we have issues with the federation, and I know that my teammates are going to be looking at me to try and resolve those issues. And I have to be the voice of the team at all times. But then in the same way, when we're on the pitch, I need to show everyone the intensity, or this is how I feel at least, or the urgency of those kind of games, the seriousness, without necessarily putting that pressure on them. So you still have to be cool, and I feel like the other players can sense it if I was really nervous about something, the same way that I would sense it from another player if I could tell that they are behaving out of their norm. And I think you don't have to. I try to be fearless in the decisions I make, and be really, really clear. And I think the same thing with the penalty, maybe in the Ghana game, when we got it just before half time, and Victor Osimhen gave me the ball, and when he picked up the ball, I could tell that he wasn't 100% sure. And I thought, this is my moment. Now I need to take the ball and I need to stick it away. I've been taking penalties in training all this time. I've been telling all the boys that I can do it. And if I miss it, then, I'll take that burden. And if I put it away, then good. But I can't let it be with young Victor, who's 20. He's the future of Nigeria, future of African football, probably. And if he's not 100% feeling it, I can't say to him, okay, you've got to take it now, because I don't want to. And I said, if this is going to be the thing that finishes my Nigeria career, fair enough. But then I know that I've done it, for the right reasons and what a captain should do. Thankfully, I put it away. So that was a good moment. But things like that, I feel like when it really gets down to it, that it's more, like I said, the other players that will look to me in a certain way, and the same way that I would have done to John Obi Mikel or Ahmed Musa or Enyama in previous tournaments or big moments. You have to own the moment, and you have to be fearless if it's going to be good or bad, but you've got to make a decision which is going to be best for the team.
Talking of good moments, mate, obviously we've mentioned it briefly, but the highs and lows of your career are probably more extreme than most, really. We've touched on, obviously, some of the moments. I've just told the listeners that you were in the team of the tournament for the African Cup of Nations that's just gone. You score a penalty, obviously, in the World Cup qualifiers for your country, but then you don't go through in the game. You play in the World Cup. We've spoken about that feeling of you giving away a pen, the you sign for Watford, you get promoted straight out of the Championship the next season. You know, it ends up in relegation. That the highs and lows that you've been through are incredible, really, when you break down your career. But you still sat here, and I've mentioned it a couple of times. I'm not trying to really embarrass you, but as a humble, intelligent guy who's really aware of the kind of player that he is, how is it that you've been able to deal with the yo-yo emotions of football so well? That's, you know, you are still young at 29, but at such a young age.
I think it's somewhat. It's also been a cocktail that's worked out from maybe my environment. I think leaving home at 12, going to a boarding school, that gave me a lot of independence. I think making a decision to leave school and sign my scholarship against what my dad wanted me to do gave me a sense of responsibility for my actions. I think being away from home, traveling around the world, having to adapt to different cultures, also kind of make me feel like I could overcome a lot of things. And then throughout that as well, I think all the setbacks of, you know, being released, being subbed at my debut game in Holland after 45 minutes, which was my special moment, I thought at the time. Being relegated in Holland, being relegated with Watford, giving away penalty on the World Cup, not going further in the AFCON tournament, not qualifying for this World Cup. Those are all the lows that I've, you know, every so often something happens, which is something that, you know, was probably my biggest nightmare at the time. But I feel like in my early years, because I already had a few of those and I bounced back from them, I always know it's never the end. So that's kind of been my mentality, and it's easy for me to say that now sitting here, because all those things are very, very painful, and some of them are painful for your ego. Some of them is because of, you know, just the general disappointment of a missed opportunity, and always wondering what if. Some of it is just the disappointment of not being able to achieve something which you perceive to be something you should do. There's loads of different moments in that, but on the other side of the scale, there's also, you know, every time you overcome that and come back from it, it kind of puts that to bed straight away. And I'm always like a junkie for those highs. So whenever that happens, I always try and find the next thing. I need to find my way back. And I think that started quite early, obviously, when I started playing, and even for me, you know, losing a game or making a mistake or getting sent off with a red card felt almost as bad as being relegated, because in my world that time, that was such a big deal. Or being released, that was such a big deal. And I think the stakes just become bigger and bigger, and you kind of learn how to deal with those things. And thankfully there's been quite a lot of nice ups as well along the way, which make up for all those things. And there always seem to be something in the future. Sometimes you don't necessarily know where it's going to come from, how you're going to get there. But I do know how I'm going to get there, but I don't know where it's going to come from. So it just comes back down to, you know, that consistency and just that keenness to find out where the limit is and trying to, you know, get the next thing and next achievement. And okay, now I've got relegated again with Watford, can I get promoted again twice on a bounce, you know? And those kind of things are the things that really motivate me.
I'm quite conscious that obviously for the benefit of people trying to improve their game, sometimes, you know, start off the research on, on a player and think, right, what have they had to overcome? And suddenly you sit across the table and you think, I've actually focused on quite a lot of, you know, unsuccessful moments in their career. But I am conscious that you've had a lot of success. And so we've talked about how you deal with the bad. How do you deal with the good? Like, what is it about achieving? Say you got promoted to the Premier League with Watford. I can't imagine you went on holiday and didn't do anything for 2 months. Tell me what achieving does for you and what you do off the back of that.
I think that feeling is what I do it for. I think it's indescribable. It's like a feeling of contentness, happiness, and the longer you had to work for something, or the more of a slug it was, or the more of a setback it was before that, the higher that high is. And I sometimes have to just take it in, and normally sometimes can make me quite speechless. I think, for example, with the promotion, that was a reward for a very long journey from the moment that I left England to getting there back to the Premier League, or getting to the Premier League in the first place. That was like a moment which really took me back. And then I had a moment where I kind of looked back and thought, wow, this is all that's happened, and I couldn't have written the script. Then I had a good few drinks and kind of let out all of my emotions. It was like blowing off steam, and just enjoyed the moment, because I also knew that this was going to be something wasn't going to happen very often. And when the bad things do happen, I tend to dwell on it as well for a good week. So I thought, now I've got better celebrate for a good week as well. So I made sure I did the most of that, and just tried to share that moment as well. I think especially for my family, my wife, who'd been on the journey with me the whole way. It was very special. And I think some of my friends who had seen that, or people that saw that journey, I wanted to share that moment with them as well, because everyone had played a part in it. And I think the key thing as well is to just enjoy those things as well. And I think you'd be silly to just look at the next thing straight away, or not really respect that moment in the same way you would do if it was a bad thing. Because those moments, they need to be something that's in your mind as well, and spurring you on to know that you can do even more. It's like a constant reminder of, okay, if I do these things correctly, if I keep giving my everything, then these can be the results of it. It's a good reminder to have that every so often.
Something that's quite popular for football fans to talk about is the group of teams that get promoted out of the Championship that seems to find it difficult in the Premier League. Watford have quite recently been one of those teams. I think Fulham obviously have been one of those teams. I could almost put Norwich, possibly even Bournemouth in that bracket of teams that are obviously exceptionally talented, but then find it super difficult in the Premier League. I know that you had highs and lows again in the Premier League. There would have been games that found really difficult, and games obviously that you found super comfortable, and realising, oh my God, I'm winning a game in the Premier League. This is awesome. But ultimately, when it's so difficult to when a season finishes with a relegation, for me to say to you like, oh, what was it that you did wrong? Because it's not the case really. It happens over a longer period of time. But in terms of the level between the two, so like the best Championship team, and then find it difficult in the Premier League, what specifically, like people are going to be wondering, like, what is it about the Premier League that becomes very difficult to survive in?
I think, first of all, the intensity of everything. I think once you get to the Premier League, everyone is talking about your games. Everything is, everyone is so geared up for the weekends. It's like you enter a different world with everything. How preparation is done, the attention for it, the kind of level players that you play against, the ruthlessness of it. And you just feel like this. Okay, this is it. This is new territory for me. It was anyway. I think for some of the players that played in the Premier League from our group already, maybe not. But I think we had quite a lot of players that were like newbies to the Premier League. I think on top of that as well, we had a lot of change in the playing staff. I think we signed 16 or 17 players at the start of the season. So I think the cohesion that we had, maybe from the Championship team, especially at the back end of that season when we were really flying, was somewhat lost. Some players moved on, which is normal as well. We were quite good. We kept the manager, Cisco Munoz, at the time. For him, it was a new experience as well. Coming to England 6 months ago, everything was new. And then for him going the Championship to the Premier League would have been all new. So, it was hard. I think the club wanted to get some experience in, which is understandable. But then I think, the team wasn't as much as the team that we had before, because I think when you go through experiences like a promotion, the bond that you have with those players is something for life, really, because you achieve something throughout a year, which is a long time in football. It kind of just brings you closer. I kind of can't really put my finger on it and say, okay, this is the reason that we didn't make it. But I think we kind of lost that team spirit throughout the year. I think it's normal when you don't win games. You have a change of management, more new players coming in January. You see that it's getting harder and harder to actually stay in it because we need to try and get 36 points. That means we need to win the next 5 out of 7 games, and we haven't won a game in 7 games. So how are we going to do that? It just becomes very daunting. And obviously, like I said, the Premier League is such a big thing that you can't get away from it either. So there comes a certain moment in the season when it kind of engulfs you, and I think our team probably was engulfed with it. And then it becomes very hard to climb back out of it. What is the answer to that? What could we have done different? I don't know. I think if we were to go back there now, I think for me, it wouldn't be as daunting and maybe not as impressive being there again. Maybe I would have been able to handle some of the occasions better. I think that was probably hard for me as well. Being on the very big stages week in, week out, and we're not talking about, just a tournament, a World Cup, or one big game a season, or 2-3, like having that week in, week out, where every game is a must win, and you can't be off your A game because otherwise you're going to get punished. I think that was a big thing for me. I think I'll probably be more ready for that opportunity now, and that's something that is really chomping at me, and it gets me to run a little bit harder in training every day, because however much I got to enjoy making my Premier League debut and playing X amount of games, I didn't feel like I really gave it the go that I wanted to have or what I had envisioned. And who knows, it might be my limit, but I'd like to give it another go and see if it really is.
Yeah, I bet. Everyone talks about in football how valuable confidence is, and it's something I wanted to talk to you about just with, before we finish, because getting off the topic of obviously Watford last year, I can, like, results wise, see it ends up with a relegation, but I can imagine that you performed well across that season, right? I know you've touched on earlier that there was a couple of games obviously that you don't think you did yourself justice in, but I think if we watched every game back and say, yeah, you know what, I gave a good account of myself, but it ended up in relegation. But as confidence goes as a defender, when you're consistently not winning games, it's really difficult to feel confident. I know for a striker, obviously, if a team can lose and they score and they feel great about themselves, but I'm interested to know from a defender's perspective, how can you, and any defenders watching this at any age, how can you become confident if, for whatever reason you're on a run of games where you've been beat?
I don't think there is a shortcut for it. I think I think the times where we weren't, we conceded way too many goals. That's what it came down to as well. We didn't have enough clean sheets. Every game kind of was like another dig. Okay, we still conceded. Okay, the team might have played well. We could have won here, but we still conceded. We couldn't get a clean sheet. So, that did do something with your confidence. I think for me, it just got to a point where it's like trying to really compartmentalize those kind of games and not letting one game define the next one. So I really try to focus on the run up during the week, the training, being able to look at myself in the mirror and think, okay, I've done everything to prepare myself in the best way possible. And knowing that the last game is not going to be the next game and it's not going to be able to affect the next game. So, if I made a mistake in the last one, that will be something that's at the forefront of my mind. Of course, I wouldn't want to do the same thing twice, but it isn't that last game again. And this is a blank canvas on the next Saturday or the next Sunday, whatever. And I can show again what I can do. And it's hard because you almost have to kind of lie to yourself or kind of talk yourself into that until it does click. And then you will get your first clean sheet, or you will get a good performance, 3 points. And that will be like the almost like the reinforcement of that thought that you put in place before it actually even happened. So that is a really difficult thing to do. But I think just the preparation, not letting anything slip on that, or maybe not being, because it's easy not to train as well because you might not feeling confident. I'm not going to run as hard today. I don't fancy training. I don't want to do that again. And you just feeling down for feeling down and feeling sorry for yourself. Or are you still going to attack that day every day until it does happen for you? And that can feel like a slog because sometimes you don't know when it's going to happen. You might not be in the team. You might have to get yourself back in. But yeah, at least, every day I get back in my car here at the training, or you get back home on the bus or driving or walking home after your school football session, and knowing that I've given my absolute maximum and I'm going to be ready for the next opportunity. And I think that's the best way I can describe how I try to deal with it. But yeah, there is no other shortcut for it, because I think unless you win that next game again or you get your next clean sheet, there'll be nothing that is going to give you that same feeling.
And it's great advice, mate, because if for whatever reason you're on a bad run of results and you're not preparing properly, suddenly that anxiety that you've got about results becomes anxiety about yourself, because you've not been preparing properly. But yeah, that's something I'll be able to take that from this conversation as well. To finish, mate, I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to fire at you that we might get a little bit more into, but they're more sort of, number one, for example, is what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received in your career?
Stay on the train, and the scenery is going to change. That was John McDermott, my academy manager. He's going to be quite proud that I still remember that. But he always had this thing about, keeping at it, and eventually, it will change. So that's something that stuck with me. I think he might have sent that to me in a text when I got released. So thanks, John. But yeah, that's something that stuck with me.
How does that stuck? When you say it stuck with you, is that something that you constantly remind yourself?
Yeah, it was the bit of just being relentless in almost having blinkers on. When you don't like what's happening around you, but you know where you want to go, and still heading in that direction, regardless of if you're getting the rewards of that in that moment in time or not. So I think that's the thing that I face till this day. Every so often it happens again. As recent as this weekend, not being picked for the team, coming back from the winter break after playing 10 games before that, and then you still have to accept that, find manager's choice. Today in training, it's snowing, it's cold. The boys last night, the centre backs played well. Everyone's happy with them. I thought they did very well. So he's probably not going to change it for the next weekend, but I've got to make sure that today in training on the Monday, I'm still going to show why I should be in that team. And if anything changes between now and Friday, when he has to pick the next team, then I'm going to be the first thing in his mind. So in somewhat, it's a daily reminder, and it always comes to me as and when. That's
good advice. I've not heard that one before.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a saying or not, but I'm definitely going to make it. So I might put it on the tile, John, if you're listening.
My next one, mate, is the most important attribute, in your opinion, that players need to have if they're going to make a career out of the game.
My position, reading of the game. I think that's the key thing, because when I'm looking at what's his name, Martinez from Manchester United, where everyone spoke about not being big enough, or Thiago Silva, or last week I was with Adrian Mariappa. We can talk about size and strength for centre backs, but I think if you can read the game, you don't have to have that, and I think that has been proven time and time again. It makes it a lot easier because you can rely on physical attributes when you are slightly late or made a bad decision. But I think the better you read a game, the easier it becomes, and the longer you probably can play in a career as well, because you don't have to absolutely knacker yourself.
You've spoken about, and obviously in this conversation we've had about learning more so that other side of the game from 24, 25, 26, 27, obviously you're 29 now. So, but that, if you knew that, what you're telling me at a younger age, what do you think that might have looked like? What do you think that might have done for you as a player? How do you think you might have learned?
I wish I focused on that a lot younger. So if I was speaking to any young centre-backs now, then I would make that a key part of your football education journey, is analysing yourself and looking at your clips. If you can get your hands on some kind of video material, I think that's the easiest thing. And seeing what the best players are doing. And sometimes it's difficult because when you're watching football on TV, the camera always just follows the ball, and there's so many moments where you can't see a centre-back, unfortunately. So if that's a live game, even if that's your local non-league team, the players that are there for a reason, playing at that level, what can you see? What can you see in those moments that you are not doing, and why they're doing things good? I wish I would have known that a lot younger, and someone pointed that out to me earlier, because then I could have become more aware of my actions probably made more good decisions consistently.
And my final one's probably quite similar. Is what advice would you give to a young William Troost-Ekong just starting out his career?
To enjoy the journey more. I think there's been moments where I mean, I've always been quite relentless, but moments where I probably punished myself a bit too much when things didn't go my way. I think to a certain extent it did push me to where I am now, but yeah, there's also been moments where I look back at it now and sort of, I wish I just enjoyed that a little bit more. And yeah, if you're not playing this week, or if you aren't, if you just lost a game, but you're going to play next weekend again, it's a new chance, or you got relegated, however much that is very painful season, you still have to try and enjoy that experience and learn something from it and see the positive from it. So yeah, it's easier for me to say now as well, because again, I am where I am now compared to when I was 19. But yeah, there's so many moments through it which sometimes felt like it was just torture, but looking back at it now, it probably was because I made that such a big thing in my head instead of actually what was going on realistically. Even if things weren't great, I should have tried to enjoy that a bit more.
I think it's funny that, for me personally, I have those butterflies that you talk about and those anxious feelings before a match day, and if for whatever reason I'm not involved, injured or whatever, and I don't have those feelings, I miss them.
Yeah.
In a way, it's funny that sort of like I'm always thinking like, I don't know why I feel like this. Like, and I know that I'm going to feel like that, but they're the feelings that I chase when I don't have them.
Yeah, massively. I can't agree more.
Will, thank you very much, mate, for giving us such an honest insight into your career and experiences. I know you've done a few. Obviously, if anybody wants to go and visit your YouTube channel and the videos that you do have, they're all online. They've certainly got a lot more views than what this podcast has. The Baller Talk conversation that you had, obviously, about your career, but that gives us sort of a little bit of a different insight. I know that you've given us so much information and key takeaways from your development as a player, and an explanation as to why you are the player that sits across from me now. But in my opinion, is a very humble guy, super intelligent, fantastic player, great defender. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. It means a lot, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope that whoever's listening to this, they could take something away from it. And yeah, the sky's the limit.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you.